Behind the glitter and glory of Nashville lies a side few dare to speak of, a world filled with secrets, addictions, and hidden darkness. These country legends sang about love, loss, and redemption, yet lived lives haunted by demons far from the spotlight. From murder and betrayal to silent battles with madness and addiction, here are 12 country music stars with the most horrifying secret life. Stories that prove fame can't hide the darkest truths. The king who turned killer. He was once hailed as the king of Western swing, a charming showman who defined post-war country entertainment. Born Donnell Clyde Cooley in 1910, Spade rose from poverty in Oklahoma to Hollywood stardom. With his tailored suits, sharp smile, and orchestra-style country music, he became a sensation in the 1940s. His television show, The Spade Cooley Show, was one of the most watched programs in Los Angeles, turning him into a national celebrity. To fans, he was the perfect image of charisma and success. But behind the cameras, his life was unraveling into madness. Cooley's private world was consumed by jealousy, violence, and paranoia. He had a volatile temper and an obsessive fear that his young wife, Ella Mae Evans, was being unfaithful. Friends and musicians whispered about his cruelty, emotional abuse, violent outbursts, and the way he controlled every detail of her life. In the late 1940s, his fame began to decline as rock and roll emerged, and the insecurity that came with fading stardom pushed him further into rage and alcoholism. Those close to him described an escalating storm. The charming cowboy king was becoming unpredictable and dangerous. Then came the night that shocked the entire country world. On April 3rd, 1961, in front of their teenage daughter, Cooley beat his wife to death in a brutal act of rage. The details were so horrifying that even tabloids hesitated to print them. He was arrested immediately, his television career obliterated overnight. During the trial, his daughter testified against him, describing how her father's jealousy had turned to pure evil. The jury found him guilty of first-degree murder, and Spade Cooley, once the smiling star in cowboy boots, was sentenced to life in prison. Ironically, Cooley's downfall became one of the most chilling parables in country music history. While in prison, he suffered a heart attack and was briefly paroled to perform a comeback concert in 1969, a gesture of goodwill that turned tragic. Moments after the show, he collapsed backstage and died. It was as if fate refused to let him rewrite his legacy. Today, Spade Cooley is remembered not as the king of Western swing, but as a warning, proof that behind the sparkle of Nashville and Hollywood, even the brightest stars can hide the darkest souls. 2. Mindy McCready, the angel voice that fell into darkness. In the mid-1990s, Mindy McCready seemed destined to become one of country music's brightest stars. With her crystal-clear voice, striking beauty, and debut album 10,000 Angels, she captured Nashville's heart overnight. Songs like Guys Do It All the Time topped the charts, selling millions of copies. At only 21, Mindy represented the new generation of strong female voices in country. Confident, defiant, and deeply emotional. But behind that angelic image was a young woman struggling with demons that fame would only magnify. Mindy's childhood in Florida was turbulent. Raised by divorced parents and pressured by the relentless pursuit of success, she entered the music industry without the emotional armor to handle its cruelty. The pressures of stardom, constant touring, and the invasive Nashville spotlight quickly took their toll. She began suffering from depression and anxiety, and soon found herself entangled in a destructive web of toxic relationships and substance abuse. Behind the scenes, she endured manipulation, betrayal, and domestic violence that few knew about until much later. Her personal life became tabloid fodder. In 2004, McCready's relationship with actor Dean Cain ended publicly, followed by her involvement with music producer Billy McKnight, who was later arrested for assaulting her. Mindy's name appeared in headlines for all the wrong reasons: arrests, drug charges, and suicide attempts. Each relapse made her a tragic headline instead of a headline act. In a chilling twist, she even became connected to Roger Clemens, the baseball star, in a scandalous affair that further derailed her already fragile career. Nashville, once her home, turned its back on her. By the late 2000s, Mindy's music had been overshadowed by chaos. She appeared on reality TV shows like Celebrity Rehab and Intervention, her pain laid bare for millions to witness. She spoke openly about her trauma, hoping honesty could save her. But the truth was too heavy. In 2013, only weeks after her boyfriend David Wilson died by suicide, Mindy followed him. She took her own life on the same porch where he had died, leaving behind 2 sons, a haunting symbol of how fame and fragility can destroy even the most beautiful souls. Today, Mindy McCready's story stands as one of the most heartbreaking in country music history, a tale of talent consumed by torment. Her songs remain timeless, filled with the longing and pain she could never escape. Behind that angelic voice was a woman begging to be heard, trapped in a world that only listened when it was too late. Our 3. Johnny Paycheck, the outlaw who couldn't escape himself. Few names in country music embody rebellion quite like Johnny Paycheck. With his gritty voice, outlaw swagger, and defiant attitude, he became a symbol of working-class defiance in the 1970s. His anthem, "Take This Job and Shove It," captured the frustration of millions and made him a blue-collar hero. But behind that rebellious charm was a man spiraling out of control, a talented musician whose secret life of addiction, violence, and self-destruction turned him into one of Nashville's darkest cautionary tales. Born Donald Eugene Lytle in Greenfield, Ohio, Paycheck started his career as a gifted singer and bassist, performing alongside legends like George Jones. He had the voice of a poet and the temper of a ticking bomb. In the 1960s and 70s, he rose fast in the outlaw scene, rubbing shoulders with Waylon Jennings and Merle Haggard. But while others played the outlaw image, Johnny lived it. He drank heavily, fought constantly, and drifted from one scandal to another. He once said, "I was born to be bad," and sadly, he lived up to it. The darkness came to Ed one winter night in 1985. In a bar in Hillsboro, Ohio, after an argument over a deer meat sandwich, Paycheck pulled out a gun and shot a man in the head. Miraculously, the victim survived, but the crime shattered what remained of Johnny's career. He was convicted of aggravated assault and sentenced to 9 years in prison. To the public, the man who had sung about freedom and rebellion had become a criminal, the outlaw who'd gone too far. Even in jail, he struggled with addiction and depression, his once glorious voice silenced by regret. But Paycheck's story didn't end there. In a twist that felt almost biblical, he found redemption behind bars. He began performing for fellow inmates and speaking about his mistakes. When he was granted a pardon by Ohio Governor Richard Celeste in 1991, Johnny tried to rebuild his life. He returned to the stage, older and humbled, his performances raw and remorseful. Yet the years of abuse had taken their toll. His health deteriorated, his finances vanished, and his spirit dimmed. When he died in 2003, Paycheck left behind a legacy as one of country music's greatest voices and most tragic figures. His life was a brutal paradox, a man who fought for freedom but couldn't free himself from his own demons. In the end, Johnny Paycheck wasn't just singing for the working man. He was confessing his own sins through every line. Number 4. Randy Travis, the gentle voice, torn apart by scandal and sickness. For decades, Randy Travis was the soul of modern country music, a man whose rich baritone and heartfelt songs defined faith, love, and redemption. With timeless hits like Forever and Ever, Amen, and Three Wooden Crosses, he built an image of quiet strength and moral clarity. To the public, Randy wasn't just a country star. He was the voice of decency in an industry often fueled by excess. But behind the calm smile and southern charm was a man slowly collapsing under the weight of heartbreak, addiction, and mental torment. Born Randy Trawick in North Carolina, he grew up in a deeply religious but turbulent household. His father pushed him hard to succeed in music, yet Randy often clashed with him and the law. As a teenager, he was arrested for breaking and entering, stealing cars, and fighting. Music was his escape, and when he moved to Nashville, it saved him. Under the name Randy Travis, he rose to fame in the 1980s and revitalized traditional country. Fans saw him as the perfect gentleman, humble, faithful, and clean-cut. But that image would crumble decades later. By the late 2000s, after his long marriage to his manager Elizabeth Hatcher fell apart, Randy began unraveling. He started drinking heavily, often mixing alcohol with prescription drugs. The once disciplined performer turned reckless and volatile. In 2012, a string of incidents stunned fans. Public drunkenness, bar fights, and finally, the infamous arrest where Travis was found naked and intoxicated by the roadside after crashing his car. The mugshot, wide-eyed, unshaven and broken, became a symbol of a fallen idol. Nashville, which had long revered him, now whispered in disbelief. The man who once sang about faith had lost his way. Then tragedy struck. In 2013, Randy suffered a massive stroke that left him unable to speak or sing. Doctors doubted he would survive, but he fought on with the same quiet strength that had once defined him. Years of rehabilitation followed, and though his voice never fully returned, he made a public appearance at the 2016 CMA Awards, standing silently as his peers gave him a tearful ovation. It was a haunting reminder of both his greatness and his pain. Randy Travis's secret life wasn't about murder or scandalous crime. It was about the slow, invisible destruction of a man who once embodied virtue. His story is a tragedy of the soul, a good man undone by heartbreak, alcohol, and the pressure of living up to perfection. Yet, even in silence, his legacy endures. Every time Forever and Ever Amen plays, it's more than a love song. It's a prayer for the man who sang it and lost everything in the process. 5. Naomi Judd, the country queen who hid her deepest wounds. To millions, Naomi Judd was the radiant half of the Judds, the mother-daughter duo that embodied harmony, grace, and Southern warmth. With her fiery red hair, infectious smile, and soaring harmonies with daughter Wynonna, she became an icon of 1980s country music. Songs like Love Can Build a Bridge and Mama He's Crazy turned her into a symbol of family and faith. But behind that glowing stage persona was a woman haunted by trauma, illness, and an inner darkness that fame could never heal. Born Diana Ellen Judd in Ashland, Kentucky, Naomi's early life was marked by pain. She became pregnant as a teenager, abandoned by her boyfriend, and forced to raise Wynonna alone. She worked as a nurse to survive while secretly nurturing a dream of music. When the Judds finally broke through in 1983, it seemed like a fairy tale. The struggling single mother turned into a country superstar. But the truth was far more complex. Naomi carried years of unspoken trauma, including sexual abuse in her youth and decades of depression that she kept hidden even from those closest to her. At the height of fame, Naomi's body began to fail her. In 1990, she was diagnosed with hepatitis C, a potentially fatal liver disease. Doctors told her she had only a few years to live. She announced her retirement, and the Judds performed their farewell tour, an emotional goodbye that broke fans' hearts. Miraculously, she recovered physically, but the mental scars never healed. Even after remission, Naomi continued to battle severe depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts. In her memoir, River of Time, she revealed the depth of her suffering, writing, "You can be in a crowd of thousands and still feel utterly alone." As the years passed, she became a respected public figure, advocating for mental health and speaking openly about her struggles. Yet, those close to her sensed that the darkness was never far away. In 2022, just one day before the Judds were to be inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame, Naomi took her own life at her Tennessee home. The world was stunned. How could someone who had inspired millions with hope lose her own battle with despair? Wynonna and Ashley Judd spoke of her courage, but also her pain, revealing how mental illness can exist even in those who seem full of light. Naomi Judd's life was a heartbreaking contradiction, a woman who sang of healing but carried invisible wounds. Her death forced Nashville to confront the silence surrounding mental health. Yet her voice still echoes in every Judd song, warm, maternal, and unbreakably human. In the end, Naomi's greatest legacy isn't just her music. It's her reminder that even queens bleed behind the crown. 6. David Allan Coe, the outlaw who took darkness too far. If country music ever had a true outlaw, it was David Allan Coe, a man who didn't just sing rebellion, he lived it to the extreme. With his gravelly voice, prison tattoos, and defiant lyrics, Coe carved out a legend on the fringes of Nashville. Songs like The Ride and You Never Even Called Me By My Name made him a cult hero, while others, too offensive for radio, painted him as a man who thrived on controversy. But behind his provocative artistry lay a life drenched in violence, hatred, and pain, one of the darkest stories the country world has ever known. Born in Akron, Ohio in 1939, Coe's early years were marked by chaos. He claimed to have spent most of his youth in reform schools and prisons, serving time for everything from theft to grand larceny. Whether all of his stories were true remains uncertain, but the brutality of his past shaped his music and his mind. He wrote about the pain of incarceration and the rage of rejection, but he also courted infamy. When he emerged in the early 1970s, Coe wasn't interested in being accepted by Nashville. He wanted to burn its rules to the ground. His first albums under Columbia Records mixed genuine brilliance with deep ugliness. While the ride was haunting and poetic, his underground records, such as Nothing Sacred, 1978, and Underground Album, 1982, crossed every moral line, filled with explicit sexual content, racial slurs, and violence. These weren't just rebellious songs, they were windows into a tormented, dangerous psyche. Country radio banned him outright. Even fellow outlaws like Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson, who once admired his raw authenticity, began to distance themselves. Offstage, Coe's life mirrored his lyrics, chaotic, angry, and unpredictable. He often performed in Confederate flag attire, provoking outrage wherever he went. He survived motorcycle crashes, drug overdoses, and violent altercations. Rumors of satanic imagery and racist ideology surrounded him, though Coe often brushed them off as shock art. Still, his reputation grew darker with time. In a world that prized authenticity, David Allan Coe became too real, too toxic for Nashville to handle. Yet for all his demons, Coe's songwriting genius remained undeniable. He penned hits for others, including Tanya Tucker's Would You Lay With Me in a Field of Stone, proving he could write beauty as deeply as he could write depravity. That contradiction between poet and pariah defined him. Now in his 80s, Coe remains a living relic of country's most dangerous era. His secret life was never truly secret. It was displayed like a wound for all to see. But within that chaos lies a disturbing truth. Country music's outlaws weren't just rebelling against Nashville. They were running from themselves. And no one embodied that more completely or more frighteningly than David Allan Coe. 7. Glen Campbell, the rhinestone cowboy with cracks beneath the shine. To the world, Glen Campbell was the golden boy of country pop, the rhinestone cowboy who lit up the stage with charm, talent, and effortless charisma. He was a crossover phenomenon, selling millions of records, hosting his own television show, and even acting in Hollywood alongside John Wayne. With his perfect smile and smooth voice, he seemed untouchable, a man who had mastered both fame and happiness. But beneath the glitter of rhinestones lay a secret life of chaos, addiction, and self-destruction that haunted him for decades. Born in a poor Arkansas farming family in 1936, Glen grew up one of 12 children. Music was his ticket out of poverty. By his teens, he was already a prodigy on guitar, playing sessions in Los Angeles for artists like Frank Sinatra and Elvis Presley. His career soared in the 1960s and 70s with hits like Gentle on My Mind and By the Time I Get to Phoenix. America adored him. Yet behind that wholesome image, Campbell was drowning in alcoholism, cocaine, and a string of volatile relationships. The most infamous of these was his explosive affair with Tanya Tucker, who was more than 20 years his junior. Their relationship became a public spectacle, a destructive blend of passion, drugs, and jealousy that turned into a tabloid-feeding frenzy. Both artists admitted later that cocaine fueled their love and their rage. Friends recalled nights of screaming, violence, and paranoia. Campbell once confessed, "We were in love with each other, and in love with being crazy." The glittering image of the rhinestone cowboy began to crack, revealing a man spiraling out of control. By the 1980s, Glen's addictions nearly destroyed him. He was arrested multiple times for drunk driving and assaulting a police officer, his mugshot plastered across the same media that once adored him. His reputation plummeted, his marriages fell apart, and his music faded from the charts. For a man who once sang about walking tall and proud, he was now stumbling through the ruins of his fame. But deep inside, there was still a survivor. After hitting rock bottom, Campbell sought help and slowly rebuilt his life, leaning on faith and family to stay sober. Just when redemption seemed complete, fate delivered its cruelest twist. In 2011, Glen revealed he had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. Instead of retreating, he faced it publicly, embarking on a farewell tour that showed the world his fading memory, but also his unbreakable spirit. The 2014 documentary I'll Be Me captured his final performances, both heartbreaking and brave. Even as he forgot lyrics, his fingers still remembered every chord. Glen Campbell's life was a paradox, a man of brilliance undone by his own brilliance. His secret life wasn't one of hidden crime, but of hidden torment, the battle between perfection and pain. When he died in 2017, fans mourned not just a legend, but a man who showed that even rhinestones, under the right light, can reveal their cracks. Hauptsache 8. Keith Whitley, the voice that drank itself. Silent. Few artists in country music burned brighter or faded faster than Keith Whitley. His smooth Appalachian voice carried a kind of sorrow that felt ancient, a haunting beauty that could stop a room cold. In the late 1980s, when pop country dominated the charts, Keith's sound brought back the heart of traditional country, pure, soulful, and painfully honest. With hits like Don't Close Your Eyes and When You Say Nothing at All, he became a rising legend. But even as his songs climbed to #1, Keith was fighting a battle he couldn't win, one that ended with a bottle in his hand and tragedy at his door. Born in Sandy Hook, Kentucky, in 1954, Whitley grew up idolizing bluegrass legends like Ralph Stanley and performed on local radio before he was even a teenager. His natural voice, tender yet soaked in heartache, made him a prodigy. But along with his gift came his curse. Even as a young man, Keith was drinking heavily, a habit that grew worse with every year on the road. In the music industry, his charming smile and quick wit masked the pain that came from decades of insecurity and loneliness. Friends said he was born with a sadness he couldn't shake. By the mid-1980s, Whitley had signed with RCA Records and was finally achieving the success he'd dreamed of. His marriage to fellow country star Lori Morgan made him part of Nashville royalty. Yet, privately, the couple's life was filled with turmoil, endless cycles of rehab, relapse, and regret. Keith wanted to quit drinking. He even swore to friends that he would. But the music business that celebrated outlaws and whiskey songs offered little mercy for a man trying to escape the myth it sold. Every bar and backstage room was another temptation, every heartbreak another excuse. On May 9, 1989, that temptation won. Lori Morgan returned home to find Keith unconscious on their bed. He had died of acute alcohol poisoning. His blood alcohol level was more than 5 times the legal limit. He was just 33 years old. The tragedy shocked Nashville to its core. Here was a man whose voice seemed destined for immortality, silenced before he could even finish his story. His posthumous releases soared on the charts, but fans couldn't shake the thought that he had been singing his own eulogy all along. Keith Whitley's secret life wasn't glamorous. It was quietly horrifying. Behind the love songs and the applause was a man crushed by his own heart. His death became a grim mirror for country music itself, an art form built on drinking songs, watching one of its finest drown in the very myth it glorified. Today, when listeners play When You Say Nothing at All, they don't just hear a love song, they hear a ghost, a man who gave his soul to music and lost his life to the bottle. 9. Tammy Wynette, the First Lady of Country and the secrets she took to the grave. To millions of fans, Tammy Wynette was the embodiment of country music's heart, a voice trembling with pain, love, and defiance. Known as the First Lady of Country Music, she sang of heartbreak and survival with such sincerity that her songs became anthems for generations of women. Hits like Stand By Your Man, DIVORC, and Till I Can Make It on My Own defined not only a genre, but an era. Yet behind that legendary voice and composed smile, Tammy lived a secret life of illness, abuse, fear, and mystery, one that even today remains partly unsolved. Born Virginia Wynette Pugh in 1942, she was raised in poverty on an Alabama cotton farm. Her early life was marked by struggle. Her father died when she was young, and her mother worked long hours in a factory. Music was her escape, but also her weapon. It gave her power in a world that often tried to silence her. When she arrived in Nashville in the mid-1960s, her voice, aching and human, set her apart. She rose to stardom quickly, balancing fame with a chaotic personal life. Behind every love song she sang was a wound that never healed. Tammy was married 5 times, most famously to George Jones, the mercurial genius of country music. Together, they created magic on stage and misery off stage. Their marriage was a battlefield of love and violence, fueled by George's drinking and Tammy's desperate attempts to hold him together. Their duets, like Golden Ring, mirrored their real lives, passion followed by heartbreak. Even after their divorce, They remained bound by an invisible cord of pain and nostalgia. But it was the mystery of her later years that revealed Tammy's most horrifying secret life. Behind closed doors, she suffered from chronic pain and underwent more than 30 surgeries. She was addicted to painkillers, injected daily with narcotics administered by her husband at the time, George Ritchie. In 1978, she claimed she had been kidnapped at gunpoint, beaten, and abandoned near a Nashville highway. Police never found the attacker. Many close to her, even her own daughters, later suspected the kidnapping story was fabricated to cover domestic abuse. The truth was buried in a maze of fear, loyalty, and silence. Tammy's health declined in the 1990s, but she kept performing, her frail body propped up by sheer willpower. In 1998, she died suddenly at age 55. The cause was listed as a blood clot, but years later, her daughters sued her physician and husband, alleging negligence and possible overdose. The case was settled quietly, but the questions never faded. Who was Tammy Wynette in her final days? The angelic voice of resilience, or a prisoner of the life she built? Her story remains one of Nashville's darkest tragedies, a woman who stood by everyone but herself. Behind her songs of devotion lay the agony of a woman trapped between love and survival. Tammy Wynette didn't just sing about heartbreak, she lived it, every painful note until the end. 10. Hank Williams Sr., the haunted father of country music. Long before Nashville became a glittering empire, Hank Williams Sr. built its foundation with his sorrow. His songs, raw, poetic, and brutally honest, shaped American music forever. I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry, Your Cheatin' Heart, and Cold, Cold Heart were not just hits, they were confessions from a man unraveling. Hank was the embodiment of the country spirit, humble roots, God-fearing words, and pain dressed in melody. Yet behind that genius was a tormented soul, destroyed by addiction, illness, and loneliness, a secret life that ended as tragically as any song he ever wrote. Born in rural Alabama in 1923, Hank's early life was marked by hardship. His father, a World War I veteran, was institutionalized for mental illness, leaving Hank to be raised by his mother in poverty. From a young age, he suffered from spina bifida occulta, a painful spinal condition that made walking difficult and left him in chronic agony. To numb the pain, he turned to alcohol and later morphine. By his 20s, he was already caught in a vicious cycle. His music made him famous, but fame made his demons louder. When Hank arrived in Nashville in the late 1940s, he was unstoppable. Dressed in a sharp suit and cowboy hat, he became the voice of heartbreak for post-war America. Every performance was electric, and every night afterward was chaos. He was known to show up to the Grand Ole Opry drunk, slurring through his songs, then vanish into the night. His marriage to Audrey Shepard was as volatile as his career, filled with infidelity, fights, and jealousy. Even as he wrote songs about heartbreak, he was living the real thing. Nashville adored him, but behind the adoration, executives whispered that Hank was a ticking time bomb. By 1952, his health and career were crumbling. The Opry banned him for unreliability, and record labels hesitated to book him. He moved from hotel to hotel, drinking constantly, performing sporadically, and spiraling further into despair. His dependence on painkillers and morphine deepened, often administered by a shady doctor who traveled with him. On New Year's Day, 1953, while being driven to a concert in Ohio, Hank Williams was found dead in the back seat of his Cadillac. He was 29 years old. The autopsy revealed alcohol, morphine, and chloral hydrate in his system, a deadly cocktail that finally silenced the man who sang so hauntingly about death and regret. His passing marked the birth of the tortured artist myth in country music, a legacy of brilliance born from suffering. But Hank's secret life wasn't glamorous. It was a portrait of pain. A man using whiskey to quiet a body that hurt and fame to hide a soul that couldn't rest. Even now, decades later, his songs still ache with truth. When you hear I Saw the Light, it's impossible not to wonder if Hank ever truly did. Harbor 11. Jimmy Lee Swaggart, the preacher who fell from grace. In the world of Southern gospel and country-inspired preaching, Jimmy Lee Swaggart was once seen as a messenger of God, a man whose fiery sermons and passionate piano playing drew millions of faithful followers. A cousin to both Jerry Lee Lewis and Mickey Gilley, Swaggart shared their musical genius, but chose a different path. Instead of the honky-tonk bars of Louisiana, he found fame in church revivals and on television. By the 1980s, he was one of America's most powerful televangelists, admired by believers, feared by sinners, and adored by millions who tuned in to his weekly broadcasts. But behind his righteous words and gospel songs was a secret life so shocking it would destroy everything he built. Swaggart's rise was meteoric. He combined the emotional pull of country music with the conviction of fire and brimstone preaching. His television ministry, Jimmy Swaggart Telecast, reached over 180 countries, and his sermons often included gospel performances that rivaled Nashville's best. He preached morality, purity, and repentance, condemning the sins of others with a voice that trembled with authority. But by the late 1980s, cracks began to show. Rumors swirled about his private behavior, whispers that the preacher who denounced lust was living in its shadow. In 1988, those whispers exploded into scandal. Swaggart was caught with a prostitute in a Louisiana motel, a revelation that sent shockwaves across America. The man who had thundered from the pulpit about virtue and self-control stood exposed as a hypocrite. In a televised confession watched by millions, he tearfully declared, "I have sinned against you, my Lord." But the damage was irreparable. His ministry collapsed, donations dried up, and fellow evangelists, including rival preacher Jim Bakker, turned on him. Nashville's religious and gospel circles, long intertwined with country music, watched in stunned disbelief. But that was only the beginning. In 1991, Swaggart was caught again, this time stopped by police with another sex worker in his car. When asked if he felt remorse, he reportedly told reporters, "The Lord told me it's none of your business." The defiance marked his fall from grace once and for all. Though he continued preaching to smaller crowds, the era of his global influence was over. What had once been a spiritual empire worth millions was reduced to a shadow of its former glory. Swaggart's secret life, hidden beneath gospel chords and sermons, became a chilling example of how even the most pious can be consumed by temptation. To some, he remains a tragic figure, a man torn between faith and flesh. To others, he's a cautionary tale about hypocrisy in the spotlight. Either way, his story fits the dark side of country's moral universe, where sin, salvation, and downfall play out like verses in the same haunting song. Act 12. Wynonna Judd, the strong daughter, haunted by her mother's shadows. To the public, Wynonna Judd was always the strong one, the fiery, confident voice that carried the Judds to superstardom alongside her mother, Naomi. Her deep, soulful tone and commanding stage presence made her one of country music's greatest vocalists. Songs like No One Else on Earth and I Saw the Light defined her as the heir to her family's musical legacy, a woman who had overcome hardship and carved out her own destiny. But behind her powerful image, Wynonna lived a life filled with trauma, secrecy, and pain, much of it inherited from the mother she both loved and feared. Born Christina Claire Simonella in 1964, Wynonna grew up in poverty in rural Kentucky, raised by Naomi, then a single teenage mother struggling to survive. Their bond was fierce, but complicated. Naomi saw Wynonna as her second chance, molding her into the singer she herself couldn't become. Together, they created magic on stage, mother and daughter, united in harmony. But behind that perfect image was years of tension and resentment. Wynonna later revealed that her childhood was riddled with emotional manipulation, guilt, and instability, all hidden behind the family's public smiles. When the Judds disbanded in 1991 after Naomi's hepatitis diagnosis, Wynonna launched a successful solo career. She won awards, topped charts, and sold millions of albums. But her private life was crumbling. She battled food addiction, depression, and body image issues, all while trying to live up to her mother's impossible expectations. Her relationships often ended in chaos. In 2003, she divorced her second husband after discovering he'd been arrested for sexual assault of a minor, a devastating blow that left her publicly humiliated. She later described that period as living through a nightmare with cameras watching. As if mirroring Naomi's struggles, Wynonna too fell into dependency, this time on prescription drugs and painkillers. She sought treatment multiple times, speaking openly about her addiction, anxiety, and lifelong search for peace. The family's history of generational trauma seemed to echo endlessly. And when Naomi took her own life in 2022, Just one day before the Judd's Hall of Fame induction, Wynonna's world shattered. She performed at the ceremony through tears, saying, "Though my heart is broken, I will continue to sing, because that's what we do." But privately, the grief nearly consumed her. Interviews since have revealed a woman torn between anger and forgiveness, still trying to understand her mother's pain and her own. She has spoken about the loneliness of fame, the scars of family dysfunction, and the lifelong pressure of being Naomi Judd's daughter. Yet, through it all, Wynonna remains on stage, her voice trembling but unbroken, using music to exorcise her demons. Her secret life isn't one of scandal or sin. It's one of inherited sorrow, of a daughter carrying the emotional weight of her family's legend. Wynonna Judd's story closes this list not with shock, but with heartbreak. In her songs, you can still hear both women, Naomi's spirit and Wynonna's endurance. Intertwined like harmony and echo, proof that even in country music's darkest truths, love never really dies.